Hello, I'm David, and this is my Sawdust and Sparkle workshop. Today I wanted to show you my little wooden puzzle which contains a secret vault compartment within it. As you'll see, it's roughly cylindrical. It has 5 rotatable wheels around its circumference, and it has a cap on the end. The cap itself has a pointer pointing toward a couple of black marks on the end rings of the cylinder. Hopefully that gives enough of a clue that what you need to do in order to solve this vault, as it were, is you need to create the correct code word across these 5 rotatable wheels. Each wheel has the full alphabet on it. As it currently stands, there are, if you're working with random codes, around about 500,000 possible solutions to this, from which we're trying to seek just one. Now the vault itself does give us some clues. First of all, on the end cap we have a picture of the Eiffel Tower with the word Paris. So I hope your minds will be going towards France or French. Then on the end cap of the tube we have a passphrase: "You'll find me in Paris if you bring someone special." Well, of course, Paris being the city of romance, we're looking for the French word for love. In order to code that, we turn the first wheel until the A is alongside the black mark on the end ring. We then move the second wheel to find the letter M and position it alongside the A. You'll notice I'm just popping my finger on each wheel as I move, because they do rub against one another and they do sometimes start wandering. There we've got so far A, M, O. Wheel number 4, we're looking for the letter U. And then finally, on the end wheel, we're looking for the letter R. Of course, amour being the French word for love. So, if you have a look at that now, you'll see that the combination is locked in to the 5 rotatable wheels. So let's see what effect that has on the end cap. As you'll see, we're now able to withdraw the end cap, and as it withdraws, you'll notice the series of metal coding pins that actually are what make this vault work. Those pins are blocked from moving until you have the right letters selected for each of the 5 wheels. Once the right letters are selected, the tube comes completely out of the device. If you have a look inside, you'll notice that there's a keyway, and that keyway corresponds to that particular letter on each of the coding wheels. If we pop that down and have a quick look at our tube now, you'll see that the tube has a hatch in it. It's magnetized, so it takes a bit of a pull to get it off. It won't just fall off. And there we have an internal space which is perfect for hiding a small document, perhaps a few notes of money, a necklace, a ring, a really special gift for a special person. Pop the lid back on, it clips into place with the magnet, and then we can slide it back into the bolt simply by doing that. Scramble the code wheels again, and there we go. I was going to say safe as the Bank of England, but I don't think it's quite that safe. It's not at all intended as a serious security device. It's rather intended as a lovely gift for someone special, perhaps containing within it an even more special gift for them. The device is based on the cryptex in Dan Brown's 2003 novel the Da Vinci Code. In that movie, the hero and the heroine had to solve a code on one of these. The code word that unlocked it was apple in that instance, referring to both Isaac Newton and the fruit that Eve ate of in Eden. If you'd like to know how this device is made, stick around. I'll take you through the build process next. I've prepared a pictorial of the wheel structure along with how the whole device goes together, including some notes which I wasn't able to fit in the video. I'll provide a link to it along with the end cap and tube cap templates in the description of the video. We start by marking out 7 circles on our timber. I'm using reclaimed mahogany that's about 20 millimeters thick. I wouldn't go any thinner than about 18 millimeters, otherwise the internal components of the wheel can get a little bit fragile. We mark out the circles at a diameter of about 70 millimeters. Our finished dimension is 65, but it's nice to have a little bit of extra. You may wish to mark out more than 7, especially if you're using reclaimed timber as I am. I did find 2 of my wheels flew apart on me at some point, so I had marked 9. I ended up with the 7 I needed. Now we're going to center punch, because we're going to need something for the Forstner-bit to bite into that we're going to drill. Here I'm cutting each of the wheels out of the plank. I'm not rounding them yet, leaving something to hold on to when I drill it with the Forstner-bit, as I do now. Forstner-bits can generate quite a bit of torque, so it's nice to have some square edges to hold on to while you're drilling. Now I bring them back to the bandsaw and I'll cut them to as close to round as I can get on the bandsaw. Just makes it easier when we bring it to the lathe if it's already close to round. Now you want to get a set of pin jaws on your lathe chuck, and you want to, I'm using a little spacer, a 3mm piece of plywood, and you want to expand the pin jaws into your 48mm void that you've just drilled with a Forstner-bit. Don't try and open them too fiercely, you will break the wheel. Just enough to stop them from spinning while we do some turning. First thing I do is make sure that they're completely round. I'm going to use the parting tool on them, but if they're not round before you use the parting tool, you'll have a lot of judder and chatter. Here's where the spacer comes in, because if you didn't have a spacer, your tool would be exiting the wheel straight into the jaw of the chuck, and that wouldn't end very well for your tool. Now I've got the caliper set to 65mm diameter, which is my final dimension. And just simply cutting a groove until the calipers slip nicely over it, which tells me that I'm at the dimension I need. You need to watch your fingers, because if, like mine, chuck, your chuck jaw carriers are sticking out of the sides of the chuck, it can give your knuckles a really good thump. Have still a little bit more work to do on the final dimension, but a little bit of sanding now won't go on this. Start at 80 grit and work my way up to about 240. Now we're going to cut a rebate in the opposite edge of the wheel to the one we drilled the 48mm hole into. The hole is the rebate is about 1/4 of an inch, 6.5 millimeters or so deep, and the dimension is a running fit inside a 48 millimeter hole. Obviously this is so that this wheel will nest into the hole drilled in the opposite side of the next wheel. And all these processes we're going to repeat for each of our 7 wheels. You may choose, as I did, to treat one of your wheels slightly differently. I'll cover that when we get there. And here you'll see I've got a piece of scrap with a 48mm hole drilled in it, and I keep testing to make sure that I've got a nice running fit. Sloppy wouldn't be great, but a nice running fit is what you're aiming for. And you'll see there I've got a nice running fit on that now. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to drill a 40mm hole in the disc, again in the side opposite the 48mm hole, and we're also going to drill that to a depth of about 6.5 millimeters. I've got a Sharpie mark on my Forstner-bit that tells me when I've reached depth. So it's 40mm bit, 6.5 millimeters deep first of all. Going to swap out for a 35mm bit, and that hole's going to go right through the wheel. Now at this point, if you went right through the wheel, you drill into the jaws of your chuck, and it wouldn't do your Forstner-bit much good. So go about 1/2 centimeter, maybe as much as 1 centimeter, and then pull out. We can then flip the wheel around and drill the remainder from the opposite side. Remember, we're doing this on all 7 of our wheels, one after the other. And there you can see the step between the 40mm drill and the 35mm drill. And now I'm swapping the disc around, expanding the chuck jaws into the 40mm hole that I drilled. And I've now got the 48mm side facing me, and I'm going to drill 35mm through to meet the hole I drilled, the 35mm hole I drilled from the other side. It also stops any breakout of him as you drill right through the wheel. I'm now swapping chucks because we're about to make the central tube device, and I had a set of dovetail jaws with a piece that I had been working on that became scrap. So you might notice it was going to become a wine goblet, but the wheel got too thin and it cracked. But it's just the right length for my central tube. The central tube has to be, if you're using 20mm timber for your wheels, the central tube is roughly 120mm long, giving you a little bit of extra to play with. You might have to trim it slightly. So we're going for 120mm in length and a 35mm or ever so slightly less than 35mm diameter, because it has to be a nice sliding fit in the 35mm through hole of each wheel. If you're making a long piece of timber thinner, to avoid chatter, you're going to want to work in sections at a time, working from the furthest point away from the chuck and leaving as much of the extra material closer to the chuck as possible to stop getting vibration. And it's a simple enough process. You use the parting tool and a pair of calipers to get your dimension at certain points, and then you can use pretty much any tool you like. I like a skew to then smooth the surface between those to get a consistent 35mm diameter. And then once you've got that in the one section, you then work a little bit further back toward the chuck to get another section, and once again and once again. And now you should have a nice consistent 35 millimeters or slightly less for a running fit, and then you can begin sanding it from there. And if you aim for a 35 millimeter dead, start sanding with about 80 grit. You're going to take 1/4 millimeter or so off the diameter, and you're going to get a lovely fit, which you're now going to test by bringing one of the wheels across. And there we go, nice fit. If it's a slightly tight fit, then do a little bit more sanding. You're going to want a nice running fit. There you go, a little bit more sanding. It's the order of the day on this one. You need to hollow the tube. I hollowed with a 22 millimeter bit, leaving myself a wall thickness of about 6 millimeters. You could probably go with a slightly bigger internal bit. I was limited by the fact that I only have an 8 millimeter extension bar, and the 22 mm was the biggest bit I had with an 8 millimeter diameter shaft. So with the extension bar, you want to go until you're about a centimeter, perhaps slightly less than a centimeter, from the end of the tube where you're going to part it. Now before you part off the tube, you can bring your 7 wheels back to the lathe, slide them over the tube, put a couple, I've got a couple of extra pieces from an earlier attempt, and then a plug to hold the wheels tight up against the front edge of the tube. Bear in mind that the front edge of the tube is not the chuck, it's a piece of wood just in front of the chuck. And here's where you can smooth out any small size differences between your wheels and get a nice consistent feel across all 7 wheels of a similar diameter. You'll find you're not very much off a nice consistent diameter, so a little bit of 80 grit paper will do the job for you. Use your fingers to feel. You get a finger smooth, then you're pretty much where you need to be. And now you can part off the tube. To do the end caps and the tube cap, you're going to want to get some nice thickness material. I used 1/2 inch here, or rather 12 millimeter. You could go as low as 1/4 inch if you wanted to, but it may possibly look a little bit lopsided if you do, in that the end caps are a lot thinner than the wheels. But it's up to you, depends on your personal taste. This is the tube cap, which is a simple circle with a pointer edge on it. And the 2 end caps have a center mark for drilling for the tube, and then 4 dowel holes. And again, we center punch each hole position. You'll see that I've drilled a stopped 35 millimeter hole for the end cap, for the tube cap. Now I'm going to use the scroll saw to cut it out.
I got a free
One of the end caps has a through 35 mm hole. The other has a stopped 35 mm hole. Both of them have 4 stopped dowel holes spaced around the center. Use the disc sander to smooth the edges after the scroll saw. Give us a nice silky feel to them. For me, woodworking is very tactile, so a lot of it's about how the wood feels in my hands. Now I'm using the templates to cut out the 26, to make the 26 marks around the circumference of each wheel that will designate the areas in which each of the letters of the alphabet will be put. I size the template to the outer diameter of the wheel so it can be glued to the wheel. Before I glue it to the wheel, though, you'll see I put blue painter's tape on the wheel. That means I can use spray adhesive to stick the template down, and the painter's tape will come off the wheel without leaving any residue. Well, if you tried that with contact adhesive, you'd have an awful mess. I'm going to take these to the scroll saw now, and you'll see we just gently push it into the blade at each mark, and that creates a very slight millimeter or so depth divot. Then at one point around the circumference of the wheel, we want to cut a keyway in the central hole, and this is where the magic happens, because that keyway that we're going to cut will correspond to the letter of the alphabet that wheel represents in the code word that we're making. And you'll see it's just a small square keyway that will allow a coding pin to slide in and out. The two end wheels are only marked at one point, they're not marked around their circumference. So there's 5 that are marked all the way around, one on each end that only have a single letter spaced mark made, and the same process is followed. They are gently cut on the scroll saw. It's worthwhile at this point to be marking your wheels in terms of the order in which they go, because very soon it's going to be very important which one goes where in order to make up your correct code word. Both end wheels need the channel cut out, and now we take the central tube and we drop it into the first tube, and we mark the point which is the highest point the wheel reaches, and we do that for each of 6 wheels, the bottom end cap and the 5 rotating wheels, because these marks will tell us where we put our coding pins. The coding pin rotates in the area where you drilled the 40mm diameter hole in your wheel, and this allows the wheels to rotate freely while the coding pins are locked in. Once I've marked where I need my coding pins to go, I can center punch them. What I'm now doing is just marking a line across the circumference that allows me to make sure that the line I'm going to drill the coding pins along is absolutely vertical and not skewed off to one side of the tube. I'm using an engineer's vise, but I've put a few layers of blue tape in the jaws just to avoid having any marks. I drill these with a 2.5mm drill bit, and I drill them about 3 or 4mm deep. Remember, you've got a 6mm wall thickness, so any more than about 4mm and you're going to be going through into the center of the tube. It's not the end of the world, but if you can avoid it, do. Put a spot of CA glue in each hole, and then I tap in a pop rivet with a diameter of 2.7mm, ever so slightly thicker than the hole that I drilled. Some people use panel pins and things like that. I like a slightly thicker diameter coding pin. It reduces the amount of play in the tube once it's locked into the device. Now I'm marking to cut my pins to length. which I do with a Dremel type tool with a cut-off wheel installed. The one I've got is a Parkside tool, a Lidl brand. You can't push it very hard or it'll stall, but as long as you take it nice and slow and easy, the tool works absolutely fine. Now those pins will need a little bit of cleaning up. The easiest way to clean them up is just to offer them up to the disc on the disc sander. And if you raise and lower, in other words roll the tube forward and backwards, you also round off the ends of the pins so they don't catch in the wheels. And now we test it in each of the wheels, and we make sure that not only that the wheels drop over the pin in the keyway, but also that they rotate freely once they're sitting. Here I'm marking the two end wheels in order to show where the code word needs to be made up. I'm doing that with a pyrography pen, just by stippling, making loads of little dots. And the same on the opposite end. So those are the two fixed wheels, the bottom and the top wheels. And your 5 rotatables sit between them. And now you can see how you line up those two end marks, and that shows you where your code word needs to be made around the circumference of the wheels. And the pointer on the end cap, on the tube cap, also points towards those two marks as well. Use an 1/8 of an inch round over bit to round over the two end caps. But I found with a tube cap that you get a much nicer looking pointer if you switch to a 1/4 inch round over bit. It makes the pointer look like it's quite sharp, which personally I quite like the look of. Some may say this is dangerous. If it's dangerous, then please don't do it. You are responsible for your own health. Now we're going to glue the two end caps down. Remember, we glue the bottom cap to the end cap which has got a stopped hole in it. I wrap the tube in cling film because I need the tube to make sure that the end cap is correctly positioned, but I obviously don't want to glue the tube into the end cap or the wheel. I use a trick that scroll saws use, and that is to intersperse white glue, which will give you long-term holding strength, with a few drops of CA glue, which will give you immediate bite, and it means you don't actually have to clamp it. You simply drop it on, let the CA glue go off, and then you can leave it for the white glue to set in its own time. And once you've got it sitting nicely, making sure that your pointer edge is facing a side, not a corner, because it'll get hidden behind the dowels then. And you make sure that your clues are rightly orientated with regard to the code as well. Now here what I've got is each wheel is being fitted into a recess which I turned in a thicker block, because I'm about to use engineer's letter punches to punch the letters around the circumference of each wheel. And because I've got it firmly inside a recess in a block, I can hold the punch against the larger block, and each of my letters will come out spaced exactly the same amount away from the edge. Once I've got that, I give it a little bit of a sand just to smooth off any unevenness. If you can blow out any dust and stuff that's caught in either the letter indentations or the marks you cut on the scroll saw, give it a couple of coats of sanding sealer. And once that's dry, you want to get yourself some coloured gilt cream, which is going to pop those letters out really nicely around the circumference of the wheel. And we put the sanding sealer on so that the gilt cream doesn't fill the grain of the wood, but it simply goes into the letter recesses as well as in the grooves cut by the scroll saw, and you immediately see how those letters, which were quite difficult to see beforehand, just pop out at you once you've got the gilt cream on. Make sure you put plenty of gilt cream on, and then once you've got all the holes nicely filled, you can just take away any excess. And another couple of coats of sanding sealer will set that gilt cream so you don't have to worry about it spreading across the surface as you handle it. Now, we're going to cut a lid in the central tube quite soon. The problem with cutting the lid is that if you just leave it loose, it'll keep falling off. So I wanted to hold it with magnets, but I didn't think the 6mm wall thickness I had was going to be enough. So what I did was I cut about a 1 centimeter long core out of a piece of wood that was exactly the same inner dimension as the hole in the center tube. I then took 2 radial slices from it, and you'll see what they look like now, and I glued those into the center tube after I'd cut the door out. And again, it's a similar trick to the last one, bit of white glue and some CA glue just to catch and hold while the white glue goes off. There's probably a better way of holding the lid than this, but at the time it was all I could think of. And I've got to be honest, it works really well. The one drawback is that it does take a bit of space away from the internal capacity of the tube. I decided to make my own dowels for the 4 corners so that I could use mahogany to match the rest of the wood. It's very important when you're making something as thin as a dowel that you work from the furthest point away from the chuck in small steps, trying to keep as much wood between you and the chuck as possible to avoid chatter. Assembly, simply a matter of popping a bit of glue into each of the 8 holes in the end caps and bringing the whole thing together with the dowels in place. To finish, I decided to use a melamine lacquer, lovely low gloss, long lasting, and dries really nice and quickly. Makes sense if you're going to spray lacquer that you make sure you've got something to protect your lungs with. And that's the wooden puzzle vault done. I hope you enjoyed the video. By all means subscribe. I'm not the world's most prolific YouTuber, but every now and then when I make something that I really like, I do like to share a video of it. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments and I will answer as soon as I can. Thanks again for watching.